Lyndal is the leader of the Eremophila Study Group. She's a passionate naturalist, not just with interests in Eremophilas, but flora and fauna across the whole gamut and the whole southeast region. She belongs to the Ornithologists Group in Canberra, supports Barren Grounds, which some of you are going to see tomorrow, Queanbeyan Landcare and Queanbeyan River Corridor projects. So she's a busy lady, but has been an absolutely wonderful supporter of this conference. She's going to share about the achievements of the Eremophila Group and how study group and what she sees for the future. Lyndal, please welcome Lyndal. Thank you. My time is sorted out. Okay, so you know I'm a leader of the Eremophila Study Group. It's one of, I think, 15 study groups that run under the auspices of the federal organisation that APS New South Wales belongs to. What you may not know is that Eremophila, which is also called poverty bush, turkey bush or fuchsia bush, is the fifth most diverse native genus with over 245 species and probably 1,000 once you get to looking at subspecies and hybrids. They're widely distributed over the dry areas of Australia, mostly in areas with less than 250 millimetres of rainfall. And around 75% of the species are insect pollinated and another 25% are bird pollinated. So that means that the species within the genus have got a massive diversity in flower colour and shape, and the ones that are bird pollinated are mostly oranges, yellows, creams, green even, and those that are insect pollinated are blue, purple, pink and white. So any colour you like, and they're very long lived and they range in size from anything that grows flat on the ground up to a tree. So there's basically a space for an Eremophila in your garden. So I'm going to talk about the future mostly today, but I do want to touch on the fact that it's our 50th anniversary this year, and I do want to just cover the first 50 years of what we've done and to give you the context for what's happening in the future. So, the Eremophila Study Group was formed in 1972 following a thing called Project Eremophila, which was led by Margaret Lee and Ken Warnes, and Ken is the first picture on the top left, with the support of the South Australian region. And at that stage there were 3 species in cultivation, 2 yellow-flowered Eremophilas and 1 white-flowered Eremophila. So once Project Eremophila got going, they formed the study group in 1972, and Ken served as the founding study group leader until 1980, by which time between about 30 and 50 species were being cultivated. Ken was also responsible for registering the first named variety with the Australian Cultivar Registration Authority, that was Eremophila maculata Carmen Star. And he, with Peter and Rhonda Hall, sourced the plants for the first Eremophila collections in the new, or then new, Australian Lands Botanic Garden Australian Arid Lands Botanic Garden in South Australia, and the Mile Park Botanic Gardens in Queensland. So meanwhile, Dave Gordon and Noel Gain in Sydney were working out how to grow them, and they developed methods to grow them in raised beds when you're in wetter regions, and generated a lot of local interest. And from then, also developed methods for grafting, which was first suggested in 1975, and that became a really important tool for maintaining plants in wetter soils. And they first tried grafting onto other Eremophilas, and then they tried the related genus of Myoporum, and that is still the only way we have to propagate more than 50 of the 240 species that are currently described. The study group also developed cutting mixes for propagation, led by the next leader, who is Jeff Needham, and they addressed frost tolerance in the 1980s, and we now know that we have more than 100 varieties that can withstand hard frost. Eremophila gradually appeared in plant sales through enthusiasts including Ken Warnes, Russell Waite, Frank Schilling, Tom Loeffler and Frank Fitzpatrick, and specialist growers such as Peter and Marion Lang in South Australia, Phil James in Western Australia and Phil Vaughan in Victoria. In 1995, the third study group leader, Colin Jennings, published their first book on the horticulture of the genus, and garden experimentation also revealed that Eremophila like being fertilised and pruned, just like normal plants. I might also say that over this period, academic work relied on a very small number of enthusiasts, a few chemists, one significant PhD thesis that looked at germination, and one person working really hard on taxonomy. And that taxonomist was Bob Chinnock, who published Eremophila and allied genera in 2007, not that long ago. This described 216 species and provided the first technical book that was widely available to the public. Prior to that, the study group newsletters were the only available source of information, and for gardeners remained the only non-academic source up until 2008, when a group of 3 members published the first horticultural book, Eremophila's Changing Gardens for a Changing Climate. So the first 40 years of the study group saw it lead collection of species from the wild for both taxonomic work and horticulture, how to work out propagation through cuttings and grafting, understanding frost resistance and general horticultural support, and taking the first steps towards raising awareness and increasing public use by making plants available through nurseries and books for the enthusiast and the general gardener. So in the last 10 years, there's been an explosion of interest, and Eremophila have finally become an overnight success. Cutting, grown and grafted plants are regularly available in nurseries, and our last look at who was selling them in May counted 27 nurseries outside the APS system with good ranges of plants, and you can buy them in Bunnings. We've had 2 more popular books published, a field guide and another horticultural book. They're the ones we're raffling, by the way. and we had an issue of Australian plants dedicated to Eremophila in September last year. And the species count now stands at 240. But we think that by the time the taxonomists have finished, it's probably going to be at around 300 species. So more recently, a lady called Rachel Fowler in, 2018, threw the genetic cat amongst the Eremophila pigeons by comparing the existing species based on morphology with the underlying genetic relationships. So what you can see here on the right, and what is also on the wall of our display down there, is a map of the phylogenetic relationships she identified, printed in black, overlaid against the colour-coded species groupings that you find from morphology. So you'll see there are some differences. If you just look at the purple section, there's a whole lot grouped in section Australophilae, and then there's a couple by themselves further down that actually are more closely related to ones that are currently in section Centus and section Phylodia. So Rachel has suggested that Eremophila will either have to be split into multiple genera or other genera in the family merged in, because there's another 5 genera in Scrophulariaceae, which is the family. Rachel's group submitted an application to keep the genus name as Eremophila based on the number of species currently present, because otherwise it's going to have to be Bontia, and we don't want that. The study group's been gradually forming relationships with the academics. We have academics from South Australia and New South Wales who presented their work into our little activities in 2017 and 2021. And we did actually manage to hold the 2021 meeting in between border closures last year, so that was pretty lucky. We've got really active chapters. We're very fortunate. We have a lot of dedicated people in our study group, and our chapters in South Australia, Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria are led by keen members who've held things together despite drought, fire, COVID, floods and rain, particularly the recent rain, which has been really depressing if you're trying to grow a desert plant. So this picture on the left, that's from our study group meeting in Adelaide. Renmark, earlier this year. And thanks to Brian Walters from ANPSA and a fantastic support group of photographers, we've also got an image database on the study group web pages, which has almost all the flowers, all the described species in flowers, and that's searchable. So if you're looking for a red flowering Eremophila that only grows to 0.5 metre, you can put that in and out will come a couple of names. And Gardening with Angus, the website, has also published articles about Eremophila, and we have a very enthusiastic person called Brian Rao, who I've never met, from the APS Fleurieu group, who administers the Old Man Emu Bush Facebook page. We have a relationship with the wholesale nursery. Through this, we ensure that new varieties for release have got accurate labels. We've been involved in release of 8 varieties since this relationship started in 2019. And believe it or not, there's a total of 36,000 Eremophila that have been or are currently in nurseries with a label that mentions the study group on the back of it and talks about our work. So you can see that, there's more to come. You can see the study group and is currently about 160 members. They've built up a significant body of knowledge towards meeting our study group and native plant Australia goals in expanding Eremophila in horticulture and enhancing public understanding of the genus. We know we have all but 6 of the named species in cultivation by at least one person. However, of those in cultivation, of that 234 that are in cultivation, 18 of those species are only grown by one person, and a further 21 species only grown by 2 people. So we've got a bit to go in terms of market penetration for some of these. So that's the history. Where are we going next? So in March 2021, we had a really lively debate at a meeting in Queanbeyan, which had been organised by our South Australian chapter. And it led to the study group issuing a call for expressions of interest for academic institutions to work with us to do some work on germination. So Eremophila seed, which you can see lower left, are encased in a really hard woody fruit, and they're quite hard to get out without damaging the seed. So purposeful germination has been a problem. And as I said before, we basically grow them by either cutting or grafting, which leads to problems with lack of genetic diversity amongst the plants in horticulture. So we had 4 universities respond, and we selected University of Queensland in Gatton as our partner. And as a first step, we asked study group members to collect fruit, and within a very short time, the university had to hand 3,000 fruit from 60 species, which people had grown in their home gardens. And interestingly enough, when they started to look at them and x-ray them, many were empty. So this is a picture of Eremophila pantoni, and the ones that are fully white, where it's white inside, there's seed. But you can see there's a whole lot where it's grey, and that means that it's empty. So that meant if they well, why the hell is this? Is it because they don't have the right nutrients? Is it something to do with the pollinators? Is it because they're being grown in Victoria? We just don't know. So, or Canberra. Anyway, we basically thought further with the university, and we developed a couple of projects, and we have funding for them. So the first one is studying seed fill in wild Eremophila in Queensland. It was funded very generously by Native Plants Queensland with a grant of $23,000. The total project size is valued at about $45,000. And we've collected so far over 500 fruit from plants growing wild in Western Queensland. So there's 26 species available in Queensland. 24 of those we're allowed to collect under a permit. We so far, I think, collected 12. And they're going to x-ray the fruit and look at seed fill, and they're going to go and collect pollen and soil samples. And so we've had study group members from New South Wales, South Australia and Victoria collecting fruit. And we're still waiting for the university to sign the agreement so I can give them some money. But once that is sorted, we'll be able to actually start that work. And that's due to be finished at about this time next year. And the second project is looking at dormancy and germination triggers. So we actually want to figure out if we can work out ways to grow Eremophila from seed to make them more suitable for mine site rehabilitation and increase genetic diversity in what's grown in our gardens. At the moment in mine sites, they're using Eremophila, but they're growing them, I believe, by either tissue culture or they're using gibberellic acid to induce germination, and that's too expensive a process. So our partners in this one are University of Queensland and Queanbeyan Landcare. And we just learnt last week we've got a cash grant of $240,000 through the Australian Research Council for a total project size of $400,000. So we still have to go through and sign the paperwork. That'll be a bit. So that one starts in December. And there's another $20,000 worth of work that we know we can do under the Queensland project that so far is unfunded, which is why I need you to buy wrapping paper, for raffle tickets, Christmas cards and whatever else we have for sale over there. So, naming. Naming is a big bugbear. We've got some issues about naming of species within the existing nomenclature because we know there's a bucket species where everything has been shoved into one place, like Eremophila glabra. But the bigger issue I find is common names and getting consistency. I don't know this is something we can solve, but it's something we're planning to plug away at in the future. We've got a few things. One is variations in common names for the same hybrid or same plant. So on the left, the wild berry is a hybrid and it's called wild berry when it's sold in South Australia, and there's a different wholesaler that calls it blue thunder when it's sold in New South Wales. So that's number one. The second is the issue of the common name. So we have Eremophila youngii in the middle there. It's just Young's Eremophila as far as I can tell, but it's being sold as desert pink. And it's as if it's a special cultivar, which when we know it's not. So that's problem number two. And problem number three is just wrong names. This is the photo that I found online for the sale of a red desert hybrid that's a hybrid of Calahabdos and Splendens. The hybrid has got red flowers and round green leaves, and yet this pink and grey photo is what's illustrating it for sale on the website. So we've got big naming issues, and I'm sure they're right across all the other study group areas. It's not aligned to Eremophilas. It's something we're going to have to continue working at. But linked to that is then the issue of conservation, which study groups haven't done a lot in, and it's particularly hard for us because we live such a long way from where our plants grow. But the thing that's a concern to me is there's a risk that even if a plant's in cultivation, we may lose it in the wild. And particularly where we have a fairly high probability that the ones available of a particular species in a nursery are probably clones from one or two collections at some point in the past. So Eremophila nivea is one of those. It was originally discovered, I think there were 85 plants on the side of the road in Western Australia somewhere. It's now grown, the numbers have grown due to a conservation activity, but probably most of the Eremophila nivea you're buying is just from a single incident collection. The other issue is losing an original plant because a cultivar has taken over, and Eremophila racemosa is the example of this. The wild type is in the middle, multicoloured form of Eremophila racemosa. It gets yellow buds and pink flowers. And there's a yellow and white cultivar called Peaches and Cream, which gets yellow buds and white flowers. And I think it probably lasts longer in the garden. Eremophila racemosa is one of those that comes past after a fire and comes in great numbers and dies. So you only get them in the garden for 2 or 3 years and they snuff it basically. But the nursery industry is only selling the yellow and white form, and the only place I know that you can buy it in the wild form is from the APS group in Cadena in South Australia. And unless you're in the US, where you can buy it anywhere, and it's called Easter egg plant. So this again was one of those, it was collected originally from a roadside in Western Australia where there were 35 plants, but a fire went through and then there were 500,000 and now they've all gone again. We don't want to lose the species in the wild. So for me, one of the solutions is for us to work with the nursery industry to and botanic gardens to try to make sure that the wild species are conserved at the same time as actually finding versions that are better for gardens and are attractive for people to buy and grow in their gardens. But I just mentioned botanic gardens, and that's another future challenge for us, I think. We've got really good relationships with quite a few smaller botanic gardens, particularly in South Australia, Queensland. and the National Arboretum in the ACT. For those, we're advising and maintaining on planting and maintaining Eremophilas, and we're often providing some labour towards establishment and maintenance. And all that's happened because our members have taken the opportunity to reach out locally. They've been already involved with them. They've mentioned Eremophilas quietly, or they've actually, there's been, in South Australia, for example, we know there's been a good Eremophila display in the Botanic Gardens in Adelaide. It's getting elderly, it needs replenishing. We're offering to sort of go and help. I think that's a really big role for us in the future, but I've got gaps with the major city Botanic Gardens. And the one I'm targeting next is the Australian National Botanic Gardens in Canberra. So what you can see there is their graph of the percentage of species that they grow compared to the percentage in of existing. It's unfortunately it's from the year 2000. It's from the year 2000, but it means that they actually grow only a quarter of the Eremophila species available. Whereas for some of these others, like acacias, they grow 28%, they grow 80% of melaleucas and callistemons, and 60% of grevillea. So I want to lift that, and I've got to reach out to that group. The other thing I think we can do is raise education and awareness amongst other groups. We've got a relationship with Canberra Institute of Technology. I've developed an introduction to Eremophila presentation, which I'm aiming to get out to all the TAFEs in Australia to try to increase knowledge of native plants amongst their horticulture students. I've also discovered a group called Cool Australia's got available a suite of primary school curriculum things on native bees. Wouldn't it be good if they had that available on native plants? And local governments, when we were in Quilpie a couple of weeks ago, they get 220 mils a year, and they're growing paperbark paperbark melaleuca as their street tree, complete with watering points. I don't know who advised them on that, but they should be growing Eremophila, for heaven's sake. They would just sit there, they wouldn't need watering. So what I'm expecting is in the next 50 years, when people look back, we would have solved the germination problem in conjunction with our university partners. We'll get Eremophilas in streetscapes, and I'm glad Clarence is working on that as well. They'll be widely available in nurseries and correctly labelled. There'll be big Eremophila collections in botanic gardens. We'll have native plants in the curricula for horticulture students. And Eremophilas will be really well known, either under a common name or a botanical name in home gardens, and as well known as acacia, eucalypt and grevillea. So, what you can do is up there. Go and buy a plant, join the study group, come and spend some money on our 50th anniversary merchandise so I can raise my final $20,000 for the rest of this project. Lobby your local council. Clarence is exempt from the lobbying and the ABC bit, but on Thursday, grab somebody and tell them they need more native plants on Gardening Australia, and go and look for these things on your next holiday. And I would say that it's a study group. We have lots of really active people in our study group. I'd really like to thank all these people, and I'll probably have some off by accident, for all the contribution they've been making at the local level. Our photographers, we've had IT support, we've got great support from ANPSA, the researchers, my husband, who I dragged around Western Queensland a couple of weeks ago. A study group's only as good as the people who are in it. So please come and join us, join another study group, and let's, get on the next 50 years and get going now. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this presentation, then please subscribe to our channel. Other presentations from the conference are available in this playlist, with new ones being added all the time.